This is James. Hi,
Hiya.
James.
Hi.
Now, if some of you have watched the other online field trips, you might recognise him because he's done quite a few with us, haven't you, James?
We've done a few.
So what are you going to be teaching us today?
Today we're going to talk about how you can freeze food at home. So we've talked about it in the factory, now we're going to talk about it at home.
Fabulous. So what is the benefits of freezing food?
The reason we want to freeze food at home is we want to basically keep our food as fresh as possible for as long as possible, but also it helps save a bit of money and helps save the environment by not throwing so much food away.
Cool, that sounds really important. So is it just a case of putting things in the freezer?
Some things you can just put straight in the freezer. So for example, things like the fish fingers that we've got here or some of the frozen fruit that we've already bought, you can just put that straight in the freezer. But things that you might freeze yourself at home might be a little bit more complicated or need a few more steps before they go in the freezer.
So what are those steps then?
So for example, if we've got something that we've got too much of that we've taken from the garden, maybe like some soft fruits or something like that, we want to make sure that we put them in a nice sealed container or in a bag, because we don't want the air getting to them because we get something called freezer burn. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
And we want to make sure that we've labelled it so that once it's in the freezer we know what it is, and we want to make sure that we know when we've put it in. So we need to put a date on there that says how long that food's been in there, because your freezer is not a time machine.
That is so clever, because I'm always going into my freezer and thinking, right, I'll get something out, and then I would just see something, a big lump of something, and I'd be like, don't know what that is.
A mystery object.
It's a mystery object. I don't know when it went in there. I don't know what it is. I feel like I should use it, but I don't know how long it's been in there. So labelling is so important.
Labelling is really important. Make sure you know what you're putting in there.
Now, you did mention something, freezer burn. So what is this?
If you imagine your freezer is like a box full of very cold air, and that cold air is about minus 18 degrees Celsius. Now, very cold things can burn just as much as very hot things can. So what you want to do is you want to protect your food from that very cold air. So make sure that you've wrapped it up properly, or it's in a plastic box with a nice sealed lid to stop that from happening.
Fabulous stuff. What about when we've got something out the freezer? Do we just take it out, pop it on the side, just leave it to defrost?
No. Well, basically, obviously, something like ice cream, great. Just eat that straight away. That's fine. But generally, you want to thaw things nice and slowly and safely. What you want to do is make sure that there's no ice crystals still in it before you start to cook it or before you eat it. Now, if you do that too quickly, what can happen is bits of it, your food will be quite warm, bits will still be very cold, and you're giving all that food back, that bacteria, a nice time to grow and multiply. So if you do it under chilled conditions in your fridge, that's the safest way to do it.
And how long would we need to do that for, James? Is it a couple of hours, or?
I would say usually as long as possible that is safe, so you want to probably overnight, so really what's that, about 8 hours or so in the fridge under nice chilled conditions.
Lovely. Now, if you're like me, very indecisive, so I say, right, tomorrow I'm going to have spaghetti bolognese, so I get my bolognese sauce that I prepared, like, a couple of weeks ago, and I pop it out, but then I get to close to tea time, I'm like, I don't fancy spaghetti bolognese, I fancy something else. Can I pop that back in and refreeze it?
No, basically, don't ever do that, because what you'll be doing is you'll be giving all those food bacteria nice time to grow and multiply, and then when you do finally get round to eating what it is you've put back in the freezer, you could end up with a very nasty stomach bug. So basically, if you've frozen it and thawed it, you can never ever refreeze it again.
Wow, okay, that's a really good lesson, an important lesson to learn, isn't it?
Nobody wants that tummy bug.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I'm learning, obviously I learned from Stuart that you can freeze fruit. I didn't realise that I could just do that and take fruit out of my fruit bowl. Is there anything else that might be like, oh, I never thought I could freeze?
We can freeze at home pretty much anything. And as we said earlier, the quicker you freeze it, the closer to how its original state it will be in when you thaw it again, okay? So we've got some examples of things here. So for example, all kinds of frozen fruit, vegetables. You might want to blanch them off, cook them off a little bit before you put them in the freezer. And then when you're having your tea, having your lunch or whatever, you can just almost cook them from frozen in the microwave. That will work quite well. Things like fish freeze really well. I mean, we've bought this fish today, so we don't have to thaw this, but if you put your own in the freezer, I would always defrost it first. Raw meat you can freeze, but you've got to be careful, especially about defrosting that. Never ever cook that from frozen.
Okay.
But some unusual things. So for example, did you know you can freeze your milk?
No.
So your milk, for example, you can freeze that, But when you defrost it, it might separate slightly because what will happen is the fatty bits of the milk will come to the top and the water will sit at the bottom.
Oh, okay.
But just give it a shake and it will come back to life.
Wow, because milk is one of those things that when you run out, you're like, oh no, you know, you want to have it on your cereal, you want a nice glass of milk.
Yep.
Mum and dad might want a cup of tea. So
Got
it's
some in your freezer. Takes a while to defrost overnight. Still defrost it in the fridge. So maybe check before you go to bed. Make sure you got some for breakfast, but you can take it out.
I'm loving these tips.
Eggs.
Surely you can't.
You can freeze egg yolks and you can freeze egg whites. So if you separate your eggs, so if you're making a recipe that uses egg yolks, so if you're making custard, which uses lots of the yellows from the egg,
Yeah.
you can then freeze the whites and use them another day for another recipe, or the other way around.
Wow, that's brilliant.
But don't ever freeze a whole egg in its shell because it'll expand.
Right,
And before
okay.
it's totally frozen, it'll probably just explode in your freezer and you won't be very popular.
No, it won't be at all. I guess that's so good because if you are making a recipe, then a lot of recipes just need the yellow. I feel so guilty throwing away the white, but I've never thought of anything to do with it. I mean, I thought I could do a meringue now, but I haven't got time.
If you're making a meringue with the egg yolks, egg whites, if you froze them, it's actually better.
Wow, this is brilliant, James. These tips are amazing, and I think it's going to change the way, certainly the way I shop and cook, and I won't be wasting much in future now.
And the whole point is that we want to throw away as little as possible. And by freezing it, we're avoiding that.